Hello and welcome into this week's episode of the Recruiting Blitz. I am Greg Smith, Senior Recruiting Analyst here at Inside Nebraska, and I am joined, as always, by digital content extraordinaire Jansen Coburn. Jansen, how are you, man?
I'm doing well, Greg. Good morning.
Morning. It is. It's a busy one, right? Like we've got a lot going on in the world of Nebraska recruiting. Even if it wasn't leading up to the early signing period, it still feels like everything is exploding right now for Nebraska football. Like I've made jokes with people kind of nationally that, who would have ever thought that Nebraska would be one stealing headlines right now? And like if you made a list of like the biggest like teams to watch right now leading into the early signing period, you have to include Nebraska right there along like Alabama and Miami, who are also doing crazy things. Even though Nick Saban always does Nick Saban things at this time, we just expected. But yeah, there's a lot happening. Obviously, the man of the hour, the week, the month, Dylan Raiola. We will get to that. But first up, what do you got, man?
Yeah, it's been a crazy week. I think if you looked back or if you looked at what was going to happen from last Monday to this time today, as of 8:26 on Monday morning, a lot has transpired, and I think we still got a lot of news left to go. But obviously, Dylan Raiola news has been causing headlines and making waves in Nebraska's recruiting world. But one of the topics that kind of got glossed over was Xander Ruggeroli's commitment. So we'll start there before we kind of build up to what's going on with Dylan Raiola. Poor Xander committed on Wednesday afternoon, and I think it kind of got glossed over because of everything else that's going on. But did want to touch on that commitment real quickly. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my very first thought was what you said, that he unfortunately committed in a time that it just got swept up in a tidal wave, and it's really difficult. And I feel like there's a couple other, like honestly, did was it this week that Jackson Lee decommitted from the team, as decommitted from the class as well? That
Probably.
that totally got swept away as well. So like, yeah, it's just unfortunate timing, but in a way, it kind of stinks for Xander because I think that's a really good pickup for Nebraska. It would have been a good scholarship pickup for Nebraska, but to get him on a walk-on deal, at least initially, and I think that eventually, once another tackle spot opens up, he'll be on scholarship down the road. But to get him out of Bishop Gorman, a guy that had other Power Five offers, to get him on a walk on deal, I think is a really big deal because he's a good player, but also you start to build that pipeline once again to Bishop Gorman. Right now, you've got kind of a person on the team that you can point to guys, and they always have talent. They are loaded up. They've got maybe the number one offensive lineman in the country for 2025, and Douglas Utu on that team. He's already visited Nebraska once. You can continue to build that relationship, but I think that Nebraska landing Xander was a really good pickup, and I think he'll be somebody to watch for the future for development for Donovan Raiola in the offensive line.
Yeah, and that puts the O line at 6 commitments. So they're building some depth, and um I don't know. I think everyone thinks, oh, there's 5 people on the offensive line. You take 5 and that's your class. But I think Matt Rhule did say at one point that if there's a good lineman, you take him. So I think
Yeah.
that's a reflection of that. Well, glad we got to give Xander his moment of glory because that is all he gets for the show today because everything else is going to be centered around Dylan Raiola. So as of last Monday, there was a moment in time where everybody believed, or not, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people believed that Nebraska could be in a situation to have both Kyle McCord and Dylan Raiola in their recruiting cycle. As of today, Dylan Raiola has not committed or officially flipped to Nebraska, and Kyle McCord has committed to Syracuse. So, what happened? What transpired with Kyle McCord's situation to get him to where we are now?
Yeah, you were about getting swept up in everything. I can't imagine what it was like. So, it's funny. It feels like this happened a month ago when I was on the flight with Kyle McCord. So I'm coming back from Chicago, visiting my family, and we're boarding the plane, and I see like a big guy, and he's got a backpack on. He kind of looks like an athlete, but he's got like a tag on there that says Kyle McCord. And I'm like, oh crap, there's Kyle McCord and his family. I see the dad, I see mom. They're sitting a couple rows behind me. So, when we land, I go ahead and say, hey, I can put out that Kyle McCord has made it to Nebraska. He's sitting a couple rows behind me. And then to go from that to then they get in the limo, they drive on to Nebraska, and then maybe 3 hours later, we get the news starting to trickle out that Nebraska and Dylan Raiola are back in kind of cahoots. They're back talking again, right? So to have been a fly on the wall when the McCord family was here in Lincoln, maybe meeting with Matt Rhule, maybe meeting with academic support, whoever, and this news starts to come out, had to have been incredible, right? So I wonder if when that came out as they're here on the visit, like what kind of feelings did that cause for them? Did that kind of shift things on the visit, on the fly, for the McCord family and what they were kind of thinking? Because now it's not necessarily, a slam dunk that we're going to come in and play right away, because we're going to have to either compete with a 5-star legacy freshman, or he's going to potentially beat you out, and be able to start, every year that he's here. So that's just it's an interesting situation. So that to me naturally, and this is what happened, makes the McCords pause a little bit and say, okay, maybe this isn't just our only visit and we're going to do some other stuff. And I think that they had some really honest conversations with Matt Rhule about where kind of the process was, and what their pursuit of Dylan Raiola, the same way that Matt Rhule and the staff had honest conversations with Daniel Kalen and what was going on there. They had a lot to juggle with that quarterback situation. And then it ends up with Kyle McCord leaving without committing to Nebraska, and then ended up taking a visit this past weekend to Syracuse and committing to them. That was it's a high wire act that Matt Rhule and Marcus Satterfield and those guys had to pull off. And I don't envy the conversations that had to have happened as that unfolded in real time in front of everybody.
Yeah, and then another guy that came on, I don't know if they came at the same time. I'm assuming you didn't see him on the airplane because you didn't tweet about it, but Julian
Yeah,
Fleming came the very next day,
he
and
did.
people assumed that a big part of that is Kyle McCord. Kyle McCord's obviously now off to Syracuse. So where are things with Julian Fleming in Nebraska? Are they still in the picture? And what are the chances of that still happening?
Yeah, it's been an interesting ride, with Fleming, because I feel like that, that one it's gone under the radar, but that would be a really important pickup for Nebraska, because Nebraska needs a true number one wide receiver. And that is what I'm told that Julian Fleming is looking for, to be the number one guy. And they need another veteran guy to help those now what are going to be sophomore trio of wide receivers, kind of continue to move along. Plus, a guy like Jeremiah Bell from Tennessee after he redshirted, right? And so Fleming would be a huge deal to get for Nebraska. He did come the next day, and start his visit. I think they like the visit from what I'm told. I think it's between Nebraska and Penn State, for him, and Penn State was kind of the runner up in his initial recruitment when he was a 5-star coming out of Pennsylvania. I have been told though that him and McCord were not necessarily a package deal. So like McCord not coming to Lincoln does not mean it's dead in the water with Fleming. It's just going to be that's going to be a battle with Penn State, but Penn State is also looking at a couple other wide receivers. And if it really is important for Fleming to be the number one guy, that gives you a leg up if you're Nebraska. So I still think that Nebraska is battling Penn State in that one. And we'll just kind of see kind of how that ends up falling out. Maybe that's a situation that if you get Dylan Raiola, he gets on the phone with Julian Fleming and says, "Hey, you can be my veteran guy, to help ease me in." That could be something that will be appealing to him as well.
If things fall through with Julian Fleming and they're still looking, do you think that they'll, no matter what, they're looking to take one portal wide receiver?
I think so. Yeah. I think that you could. The good thing is that you can quickly pivot in that scenario, because you still would have some time before winter conditioning starts, which I believe is January 12th. And there is a little bit of visit time in there for portal guys. And so you could still bring a guy in that's going to enroll mid year. So yeah, I think that they would pivot on that. And I still think that that should be a real priority for them, being able to land a veteran wide receiver. I like what they got with those young guys, and I think that there is some real potential there. But I would still love to see another vet in that room, to lead that group this year.
Very well. Well, on to the weekend. The weekend came, and it came with more surprises than just Dylan Raiola
Yeah.
coming on campus. There was, I guess, a pair of defensive flip targets, maybe perhaps more. Nebraska hosted. So, who are the guys that accompanied Dylan on this weekend, and what's the standing with those guys?
Yeah, I think the you start off first and foremost with top 100 player linebacker out of California, out of Poly, Dylan Williams, who is currently committed to Oregon. It's interesting with that one is that it feels like it's an out of nowhere visit, and it kind of is because anytime you have a late visit and a guy who's committed to a good defensive school and a program that's rolling right now with Dan Lanning, it does get your eyebrows raised, but. Remember that Dylan Williams actually came out previously for a visit. I believe it was the spring game he was here for. So he is familiar with Nebraska. And Tony White, who does the California recruiting, has been really high on him. You get Tony White to re-up and come back. You see that defense and what it looks like. I think Nebraska, from what I'm told, Nebraska put themselves in a really good position to pull that flip with Dylan Williams, and it would be a really big one. Like as all things right now, the Dylan Raiola situation kind of overshadows everything. But we would look back on Dylan Williams flipping if he did, and be like, that was a huge deal for Nebraska's future and their defense. Then Shavers, another flip target, another four-star linebacker from down in Miami. Last week, it was kind of a weird situation. He's committed to Miami. Word started to get out that he was going to decommit from Miami, but he never made a public declaration that he was decommitting from Miami. And so he had now we all know that he has, and so it's reflected on his rivals profile and all of that. And then he quickly sets up a visit to Nebraska for an official visit, and kind of talking to people close to that recruitment. I've put in a future cast for Vince Shavers to end up at Nebraska. I think Nebraska will pull off that flip. I think they went and saw him during the kind of the contact period here recently. They did a nice job of keeping that under the radar. And so I think the Nebraska is well positioned there. And then the third defender that was on campus that totally went under the radar, Bly Hill, a transfer defensive back, 6'3". The weight has varied 160 to 190. I've seen it all over the place. You just never know. I'm going to call it 175. He was on campus, and he's more of a true cornerback prospect, I think. And I think that's something that Nebraska definitely needs in this recruiting cycle, specifically from a transfer that could maybe come in and give you some depth. And I think Nebraska's in a good position there. So they had a good final weekend, and I will not rule out. I'm not saying anyone was there that we don't know about, but I would not rule out them having any surprises up their sleeves because they've done such a good job of keeping this stuff off the radar.
Yeah, and then as you mentioned earlier in the show, there was a couple, one or maybe more, I can't remember. It's been so much that's gone on this past week. A couple of defensive guys that have decommitted, including Jackson Lee. You get the sense that they're trying to make room for a couple of these guys that are possible late flips to the class.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I think they have to, yes, they do have to do that, but they also have to just make room in general, right? Part of the thing that I think that no one's really talking about remember going back to, when Isaac Gifford made his announcement and Bryce Benhart and Ben Scott is coming back with all these guys wanting to come back. You got to make room for that too, right? And so there's a balancing act, and even then, Nebraska is still going to be way over scholarships once we get through the early signing period, and there's going to have to be some real tough conversations of guys I think that wanted to stay in Lincoln that are going to maybe be told that, hey, we just don't see a path to playing time for you here. We'll do what we can do to help you out. But it's just not going to happen here for you. I think there's going to have to be several of those conversations, especially if things continue to break in a positive way to finish this class. And you start to get some renewed interest from guys and you get some transfer guys that want to get in. There's going to be some uncomfortable conversations.
All right, we've made it to the last bit of news, which is really had a mention in everything we've talked about thus
Mm-hmm.
far. Dylan Raiola, the latest on that, the latest on Nebraska's quarterback situation, the ups and downs, the portal conversations. Are they going to lose their they're already committed Daniel Keelan for 2024? Is
Mm-hmm.
Raiola going to take his spot, or what's the situation with Dylan Raiola as a Monday morning?
As of Monday morning, right now, I'm trying to see what time it is. 8:39 Monday morning. The latest is that all indication is that Nebraska is going to pull this flip off from Georgia and pull, I would say, one of the biggest upsets like that I can remember in recent history. One of the biggest flips that I can remember. This would be on the level of Travis Hunter flipping from Florida State to Colorado. It's that sort of a big deal, like just for Nebraska and nationally. It's a huge story. And I still think that as of this morning, that is the way it's going to go. That Nebraska is going to pull this off. Now, with that being said, there are all sorts of things that come up after off of that, right? Like what happens with Daniel Kalen? I think that Daniel Kalen now sticks in Nebraska's class. And I think that part of that is that now Nebraska in this scenario would be taking one additional quarterback instead of two. So instead, if Kyle McCord was also coming, I think that we might be talking about a different story and Daniel Kalen will be looking elsewhere. But the problem also for Daniel Kalen was that the team he was looking at, Michigan State, that he was going to take a visit to, if you noticed, Aiden Childs, the Oregon State quarterback who was just a true freshman this year, transferred to Michigan State. He's going to start. No one on that roster or that will come to that roster is going to replace him because he's a starter for the next at least 2 years. Then they got another quarterback out of Illinois, Alessio Milovic, who just committed yesterday. And I think they're going to take maybe one more high school quarterback, potentially Tyler Cherry out of Indianapolis, a 4-star. So they're full basically at a quarterback. So it was, I think, a better situation for Kalen to stay put with Nebraska and kind of fight it out and see what happens, right? That also brings up the question, though, of what happens with the other quarterbacks on campus, because there are still, Chuba Purdy and Heinrich Haarberg situations to deal with. I could see one of those two, more likely Chuba being the one that gets in the portal of that group. And then we see what happens kind of with Heinrich, whether or not he's kind of a third guy or he's kind of a third hybrid guy where he kind of goes back to the role he started off the season with. Because it feels like 10 years ago when we saw him catch a pass against Minnesota, right? Based on all the stuff that happened this year. But yeah, there's a lot going on there. But I will also say this, and I should say it because I feel like I'm always reminding people when it comes to Dylan Raiola, all of the hype and hysteria around this recruitment has overshadowed just how good of a football player he is. I think that we talk so much about the recruitment and can Nebraska pull it off that we don't talk about how good he is. And people will naturally say, well, dang, Greg, is he actually worth all of this talk? Yes. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
the answer is yes. He is an excellent quarterback prospect. And I remember I posted on our insiders board his senior film that he put out just a little bit ago. And if you watch that, there are throws that he makes on that film that you haven't seen a Nebraska quarterback make in a long time. Like his arm strength is outstanding. He makes off-platform throws routinely. Like he's a great quarterback prospect because that will also dovetail into the next conversation, if and when he does announce, can he play as a true freshman? And I think the answer is yes on that one as well.
Yeah, and a lot of people were expecting a commitment by Sunday. And
Yeah.
as of Monday, no commitment yet. Personally, for me, I wasn't surprised because I think people tend to forget that usually how it works in recruitments. I know this is a unique one because he's been on campus multiple times and there's not a whole
Mm.
lot more for him to see. But typically, they do their visit, then they go home and they have time to sit down, take it all in, talk
Mhm.
as a family, and then make a decision. But a lot of people were hoping for some news yesterday when he was on campus. Um, there people thinking that the longer this plays out, the worse it could get for Nebraska. It to me, it doesn't feel like Nebraska's behind or things are not shaping out like people had hoped. What is your read on the timeline?
Yeah, I don't I would totally agree. And I would caution people, or I guess phrase it this way, like just because there isn't a public announcement doesn't mean there hasn't been a private commitment. And I think that happens all the time. Like, and I mean all the time. Like I forget which there was, and I know they wouldn't say anyway, but there was a commit this year that happened that like I was told about it, and the kid told me that he told the staff, and it was like 2 weeks later that he announced it. Like that stuff happens all the time, and I don't think that people quite understand how often that it happens, but it does happen quite a bit. And I do think that the whole scenario of wanting to go home, think about it. Also if you want to talk to, in this case, Kirby Smart and his staff, which I don't know. That's a whole different discussion of how awkward that would be. And if you're Kirby Smart, do you even want to do that on a Sunday, the day right as the dead period is about to hit, and you could be doing something else to get somebody that was going to come to your team? I don't know. That's a whole awkward situation. But yeah, there's a whole myriad of reasons why there could not yet publicly be an announcement for this. But I know that Nebraska fans, because it's such a big deal, Nebraska fans immediately go to, oh no, does that mean that we're going to strike out? That does not necessarily mean that. As I say all the time on the board and on Twitter, patience is a virtue. Sometimes you just have to wait because we are on Dylan Raiola's timeline, not anyone else's and what they want him to do.
Well, we have, what is it, 3 more days until the official early signing day period transpires. Is
Yeah.
there anything I missed, Greg, that we need to hit on before we get out of here?
No, I don't think so. I think we pretty well covered it. There's a lot going on right now. There's still a lot more to unfold. Like I said, it wouldn't like I think that there's going to be a lot of fireworks for Nebraska between now and when the early signing period closes. This should be an exciting finish to the cycle after we kind of thought it was just going to be ho hum, right? Like it feels like every time you think that is when the fireworks actually go off. So I think that Nebraska fans should rest assured that things will go well coming up for signing day. But we will have full coverage of all of those things that may or may not happen. So make sure that you like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can get our videos in reaction directly into your feed. Also, pop over to InsideNebraska.com. If you're not subscribed, make sure you're subscribed to the website so you can get all of our premium content there, as we'll have wall-to-wall coverage of everything happening with early National Signing Day, including all things Dylan Raiola, should that come to pass. It should be a fun time for Husker Nation, and we will catch you guys later.